Welcome to our deep dive into the Porsche 356. You've given us quite the stack of material. Articles, historical accounts, even some collector's guides. It's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, it really is. It's fascinating to see how the 356 captures the imagination, from its engineering to its racing legacy and its enduring appeal to collectors.
Absolutely. We've got some detective work ahead of us, too, with some conflicting info on model years. But that's part of the fun, right? Okay, let's dive into the origin story. Post-war Europe, rebuilding, and the birth of a sports car legend.
You know what's striking is that the 356 wasn't born in some state-of-the-art facility. The very first models were hand-built in Gmünd, Austria, in a former sawmill. Imagine that. The genesis of Porsche in a sawmill.
A sawmill. That's amazing to talk about humble beginnings. And I bet those Gmünd cars are worth a fortune today.
You bet. Only around 50 were produced, each with a handcrafted aluminum body. They're incredibly rare and highly sought after by collectors.
Okay, so Porsche starts in a sawmill, then eventually moves to Zuffenhausen, Germany. Was that when they switched to steel bodies?
Yes. The move to Zuffenhausen in 1950 was a pivotal moment. They partnered with Reuter for steel body production, which allowed for larger-scale manufacturing. And you know what's interesting? That partnership eventually led to Porsche acquiring Reuter, whose seat-making division later became the iconic Recaro brand. Talk about a legacy.
That's a fantastic bit of trivia. Now let's talk about the evolution of the 356 through its different series, pre-A, A, B, and C. It's fascinating how each one has its own distinct personality. What are some of the key things that set them apart, especially for someone who might be looking to identify them?
Well, each series reflects not only Porsche's engineering advancements, but also the evolving tastes of the sports car market. Let's start with the pre-A, produced from 1948 to 1955. Think split windshields, especially on those early models up to 1952, a dead giveaway for a true vintage 356. Then came the bent, V-shaped windshields. And of course, who can forget the iconic 356 Speedster, introduced in 1954.
Ah, the Speedster. Every car enthusiast's dream, right? What's the story behind that legendary car?
Well, Max Hoffman, the sole U.S. importer of Porsches at the time, envisioned a stripped-down, affordable roadster that would appeal to American buyers, especially in sunny California. The Speedster, with its low windscreen, bucket seats, and minimalist top, was born. And its popularity has only grown since. Speaking of popularity, did you know that replicas of the 356A, especially the Speedster, have become quite the trend?
Really? Why do you think that is? Is it the vintage aesthetic, the allure of a classic Porsche, or something else entirely?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. There's a certain romanticism associated with the 356, a sense of history and timeless style. For some, building or owning a replica is a way to experience that magic. Without the price tag or maintenance challenges of an original, it's a way to connect with the 356's spirit, even if it's not the real deal.
That makes sense. There's definitely a certain charm to those vintage lines. Okay, back to the timeline. After the pre-A, we have the 356A, right?
Yeah.
What were the major changes there?
The 356A, launched in late 1955, brought several notable updates. First, the split and bent windshields were gone, replaced with a single curved windshield, a significant visual change, mechanically. The 311T6A marked a milestone by offering the legendary 4-cam Carrera engine as an option.
Hold on, the 4-cam Carrera engine, that sounds serious. What made this engine so special?
This wasn't your average Beetle engine anymore, developed for racing. The 4-cam Carrera engine was a masterpiece of engineering, pushing the limits of performance. Just imagine the thrill of driving a lightweight 356 with that kind of power under the hood.
I can see why replicas with that engine are so sought after. Okay, let's move on to the 356B. What new developments did this series bring to the table?
The 356B, redesigned in late 1959, had two distinct body types, the T5 and the T6. You could recognize the T5 by its raised headlights and redesigned bumpers, bit of a facelift for the 356.
It sounds like the 356 was constantly evolving, refining its design with each iteration. What about the T6? What set it apart?
The T6, introduced in 1962, brought further refinements, a squared-off hood, a larger rear window in the coupe, and those distinctive twin grills on the engine cover. It was all about those subtle yet significant details that added up to a fresh, modern look.
And within the B series, there's this rare gem, the Carmen Notchback Coupe. What's the story behind that unique model?
The Carmen Notchback was a limited production model built for just 2 years, 1961 and 1962. It's a fascinating blend of styles, the rear end of a cabriolet, the windshield frame of a T6 coupe, and a unique fixed hardtop. Its rarity makes it incredibly desirable among collectors.
Like a greatest hits compilation of 356 design elements. All right, finally we reached the 356C, the last hurrah before the 911 took center stage. What were the defining features of this final evolution?
The 356C, introduced in 1963, emphasized refinement. Disc brakes became standard, a major advancement in safety at the time, and it boasted the most powerful pushrod engine Porsche had ever offered, the 95-horsepower SC. Interestingly, 1964 saw peak 356 production. The same year, the iconic 911 debuted, yet the 356C continued to be sold alongside the 911, a testament to its enduring appeal.
It's fascinating how the 356 and the 911 briefly shared the stage, like a passing of the torch from one legend to another. But before we delve into the 356's racing legacy, I have to ask, did you come across anything about those Dutch police cars? Some sources mentioned them, and it just sounds so cool.
Yes, the Dutch police cars. What a fitting tribute to the 356. The last 10 models produced were special order cabriolets specifically for the Dutch police force. Imagine being pulled over by a Porsche.
That would definitely make a traffic stop more memorable.
All right.
Okay, enough about law enforcement. Let's talk about speed. The 356 wasn't just a head turner on the streets. It was a force to be reckoned with on the racetrack.
Absolutely. It all started with the 1951 Le Mans 24 Hours race. Porsche entered a specially prepared 356 SL, nicknamed the Gemünd Coupe. And guess what? They won their class.
That must have been an incredible moment for such a young company. Talk about making a statement.
It was a sign of things to come. The 356 would go on to achieve numerous racing successes, further solidifying its legendary status. They even collaborated with the Italian tuning company Abarth in the early 1960s, resulting in the highly sought-after 356B Carrera GTL Abarth Coupe.
An Italian-tuned Porsche. Now that's a combination I'd love to hear more about. What made that collaboration so special?
It was a match made in motorsports heaven. Abarth took the already potent 356B and gave it a lightweight aluminum body, along with a host of performance enhancements. The result, a car that was both stunning to look at and incredibly fast on the track. These Abarth modified 356s are highly prized by collectors today.
I bet they are. Okay, so we've got the Gemünd Coupe, the Abarth collaboration. Any other notable race-prepped 356s that caught your eye in the research?
There were quite a few. The 356 SL, which stood for Sportlight, was all about weight reduction, featuring minimalist design elements like aluminum body panels and a Spartan interior. Then there was the 356A Carrera GT, a true powerhouse with the potent 4-cam Carrera engine and aerodynamic improvements that made it a formidable competitor.
It's amazing to think that a car that started in a sawmill would evolve into such a dominant force in racing. Okay, let's shift gears now and dive into the world of the 356 as a collector's item. The sources are full of eye-popping figures. What kind of prices are we talking about here?
Well, as you can imagine, the rarest of the rare, those given gars, are in a league of their own. If you ever come across one for sale, expect to pay millions.
Millions, wow. That's a serious investment. What about some of the more common 356s? What kind of prices do they command?
Even the more common 356s can fetch astonishing prices. For example, a Concours level 1958 356A 1600S Speedster, meaning one that's been meticulously restored to its original condition, can easily go for around $500,000.
$500,000 for a car from the late 50s? That's incredible. What about the later models, like the 356?
A good condition 1965 356C Coupe, the final iteration, can still set you back around $75,000. It's remarkable how these cars have appreciated in value over the years.
It's a testament to their enduring appeal. What are some of the key factors that drive the value of a 356? What should someone be looking for when assessing the worth of one of these classics?
Rarity, condition, and originality are the holy trinity of collector car values. Those limited production Gemünd cars are at the top, followed by iconic models like the Speedster, particularly the early ones. But condition is paramount. A well-maintained 356, especially one that retains its original features, will always command a higher price than one that's been heavily modified or poorly restored.
You mentioned originality a couple of times now. I know this ties back to those matching numbers we talked about earlier. Can you remind us what that means and why it's so important in the collector car world?
Absolutely. Matching numbers means that the engine, transmission, and body panels all have the original numbers that correspond to the car's factory records. It's the gold standard for verifying a classic car's authenticity and provenance. Think of it like a fingerprint. If the numbers match, you know you're dealing with a genuine article.
So if you're lucky enough to be in the market for a 356, what are the crucial things to look for beyond those matching numbers? What advice would you give to a potential buyer?
The most important thing, above all else, is to find a rust-free car. Rust is the nemesis of classic cars, and repairing it can be a nightmare, both financially and in terms of time. A 356 that's been kept in a dry climate and meticulously cared for will be a much better investment in the long run.
So even more important, mechanical condition.
Absolutely. Mechanical issues can be fixed, but extensive rust can be a deal breaker, of course. You'll also want to verify those matching numbers. Carefully inspect the bodywork for signs of previous accidents or repairs, and, ideally, have a pre-purchase inspection by a qualified 356 specialist.
That sounds like essential advice. You don't want any surprises when you're investing in a classic car like this. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've journeyed from a humble sawmill in Austria to the heart of the collector car market, uncovering the history, the evolution, and the enduring allure of the Porsche 356.
It's been quite a ride, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, from the technical nuances that make this car so special to the joys and challenges of owning one today.
And I'm excited to dive even deeper.
Me too. Me too.
All right, let's get under the hood, so to speak. What are some of the mechanical quirks or innovations that truly set the 356 apart from other sports cars of its era?
Well, the 356's engine is a great place to start. Remember, it's based on the Volkswagen Beetle's engine. But Porsche transformed that humble power plant into something truly remarkable.
I'm curious about that connection to the Beetle. They were both air-cooled, right? That seems unusual for sports cars, especially today.
Yeah. Air-cooled engines were quite common in the early days of motoring, and both the Beetle and the 356 were designed by Ferdinand Porsche, so there's a shared DNA there. But the 356's engine went through a radical transformation to become a true sports car heart.
So how did they turn the Beetle's engine into something worthy of a Porsche?
They took the basic Beetle engine case and built upon it, creating something entirely new. New cylinder heads, camshafts, crankshafts, intake and exhaust manifolds, and they added dual carburetors for increased performance. The result was an engine that delivered significantly more horsepower than the Beetle's, while retaining that air-cooled simplicity.
That combination of power and simplicity must have been a joy to drive. But let's talk a bit more about those air-cooled engines. I know they have their passionate fans and detractors. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that design, especially in a performance car like the 356?
Well, on the plus side, air-cooled engines are lighter and simpler than their water-cooled counterparts. There's no radiator, water pump, or hoses to worry about, which reduces weight and complexity. That's a big advantage in a sports car where performance is key.
And I imagine that simplicity translates into reliability as well.
Exactly. They're less prone to issues related to cooling systems, which can be a headache in more complex engines. Plus, they handle temperature extremes better, whether it's freezing cold or scorching desert heat.
That makes sense, especially considering the 356 was competing in endurance races like Le Mans, where reliability is crucial. But I'm guessing there's a downside to all this simplicity.
Of course, air-cooled engines can be noisier than their water-cooled cousins, and they tend to run hotter, which can sometimes lead to cooling challenges, especially in stop-and-go traffic. But in the context of the 356, these were trade-offs that many drivers were willing to accept for the performance benefits.
It seems like every engineering decision involves some compromise. But Porsche clearly made it work with the 356.
Speaking of engineering, were there any other innovations, aside from that iconic engine, that helped shape the 356's legacy?
Absolutely. The 356's unibody construction was quite innovative for its time. Unlike traditional body-on-frame construction, where the body is bolted onto a separate chassis, the 356's body and chassis were integrated into a single unit. This made the car significantly lighter and stronger, which translated into better handling and performance.
I've heard that unibody construction can be tricky when it comes to restoration, though. Is that true?
It can be. If there's rust damage, it can be more challenging and expensive to repair a unibody car compared to a body-on-frame car. But back in the 356's era, unibody construction was cutting-edge technology, and it played a key role in the car's success.
It's amazing how certain engineering choices become defining features of a car.
Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something I know our listeners probably daydreaming about, what it's actually like to own and drive a 356 today. It must be an incredible experience.
Owning a 356 is a dream for many, and it's an experience unlike anything else. But it's important to understand both the joys and the realities of owning one of these classic machines.
Let's start with the good stuff. What are those unique joys of owning and driving a 356? Paint a picture for us.
Okay, imagine this. You're behind the wheel of a vintage 356. The air-cooled engine hums with a distinctive, almost musical note. The steering is direct and unassisted, requiring your full attention and effort. The car feels light and agile, responding to your inputs with precision and immediacy. It's a visceral, engaging driving experience. That connects you to the road and the machine in a way that modern cars simply can't replicate.
It sounds almost poetic, but I'm guessing there's a learning curve involved in driving a car from that era. It's not like hopping into a modern sports car with all its electronic aids and driver assists.
That's right. 356s demand a certain level of skill and respect. The steering is heavy at low speeds, the brakes can be a bit gratty, and the suspension is definitely on the firm side. It's not a car for casual cruising. You need to be engaged and present at all times.
So not exactly a daily driver for someone who's used to modern comforts.
Perhaps not, but for those who appreciate the purity of the driving experience, the rewards are immense. There's a real sense of accomplishment that comes with mastering a vintage car like the 356.
I can imagine. Okay, let's talk about the practical side of 356 ownership. What are some of the challenges involved in maintaining one of these classics today?
Well, parts availability can be a challenge, but thankfully, there's a vibrant community of 356 enthusiasts and specialists who can help source parts, both new and used. Online forums and clubs are invaluable resources for connecting with other owners and getting advice.
The sources we have really stress that rust is the biggest enemy of these cars.
Absolutely. Finding a rust-free 356 is crucial. Rust repair on a unibody car like this can be incredibly complex and expensive. Regular inspections and preventative maintenance are essential to keep rust at bay.
And what about finding mechanics who are qualified to work on these vintage machines?
That can be tricky, depending on where you live. Ideally, you'll want to find a specialist with extensive experience in air-cooled Porsches. But even if you can't find a specialist nearby, there are plenty of online resources and communities where you can connect with other 356 owners and get advice on maintenance and repairs.
It's reassuring to know. It sounds like the 356 community is a valuable resource for owners. Before we move on, I have to ask about the replica 356s. You mentioned them earlier, and I'm curious to know more. What's the general consensus on replicas within the 356 community?
It's a mixed bag. Some purists frown upon replicas, seeing them as pale imitations of the real thing. They argue that a replica can never truly capture the essence of a genuine 356. Others appreciate replicas as a way to experience the 356's spirit without the financial burden or maintenance headaches of a vintage car. It ultimately comes down to personal preference.
I can see both sides of that argument. There's a certain romanticism associated with owning an original, but replicas do offer a more accessible way to experience that classic style. I guess it's like anything else in the world of collecting. It's about finding what resonates with you personally. Speaking of personal experiences, I'd love to hear about your own encounters with the 356. You ever had the opportunity to drive one?
I have, and it was an unforgettable experience. It was a beautifully restored 356A coupe, and the moment I got behind the wheel, I felt a connection to automotive history. The car felt so alive, so responsive. It was like driving a piece of art.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, I know we need to move on, but before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listener with something to ponder. Any final thoughts to spark their curiosity even further?
Think about this. The 356 wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of post-war optimism, of German engineering at its finest, of a burgeoning sports car culture that would forever change the automotive landscape. So, I pose this question to you, dear listener. What do you think the 356 represents today? What does it say about the people who own and drive these iconic machines?
We've been on quite a journey with the Porsche 356, from its humble beginnings to its legendary status. Now, let's say our listener is in that enviable position of actually shopping for one. What are some of the key things to look for, beyond the obvious, like those matching numbers and a rust-free body?
That's a great question. Let's assume our listener has found a 356 that passes those initial checks. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty details. One thing that often gets overlooked is the condition of the underbody. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the beauty of the 356's exterior, but the underbody tells a story. It can reveal a lot about the car's history, how well it's been cared for, and any potential issues lurking beneath the surface.
So we're talking about literally getting down on the ground and inspecting every nook and cranny.
Exactly. Look for any signs of damage, repairs, or corrosion, especially around the jack points, the floor pans, and those crucial longitudinal members that run the length of the car. These are structural elements that are vital to the car's integrity.
I'm starting to see that buying a classic car like this is as much about detective work as it is about passion. What else should we be looking for?
Panel gaps are another telltale sign. The gaps between the doors, the hood, and the trunk lid should be consistent and even. Uneven gaps can indicate poor repairs, previous accidents, or even rust that's been patched over.
It's amazing how these seemingly minor details can reveal so much about a car's history.
They really can. Now let's move on to the engine compartment. Obviously, you'll want to double-check that the engine number matches the car's documentation. Those matching numbers are crucial. But there are other things to look for as well. For example, the type of carburetors can be a red flag. Weber carburetors were never used on the pushrod engines, so if you see them, it could indicate that the engine has been modified or even swapped out.
So that's a sign that something might not be quite right. But why were Weber carburetors never used on the pushrod engines? I'm curious about the technical details behind that.
Well, Weber carburetors were typically used on the more powerful 4-cam Carrera engines, not on the pushrod engines found in most 356s. Their presence on a pushrod engine could mean an incorrect restoration, an engine swap, or even an attempt to misrepresent the car as something it's not. It's definitely a cause for further investigation.
It's like solving a puzzle, piecing together the clues to determine a car's authenticity. What else should we be scrutinizing?
Take a look at the tires. Their DOT numbers will tell you their age, which shouldn't be more than 7 years old. Old tires can be dangerous, especially on a classic sports car.
Safety first. And what about the interior? Any hidden clues lurking in the upholstery and trim?
Absolutely. The seats are a good place to start. In a genuine 356, the seat padding should be felt, not foam, and the seat cushions should have a very specific type of pleat, not a glued-in groove. There are plenty of online resources with photos of original 356 interiors, so you can compare what you're seeing to the real deal.
It's incredible how much attention to detail is required when inspecting a classic car.
It's all about knowing what to look for and understanding the nuances of the 356.
Yeah.
And I can't stress enough the importance of a pre-purchase inspection by a qualified 356 specialist. They have the experience and expertise to spot potential issues that a casual observer might miss. It's a worthwhile investment that can save you headaches and potentially a lot of money down the road.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I've gained a whole new level of appreciation for the Porsche 356. It's more than just a beautiful classic car. It's a piece of automotive history with its own unique story to tell.
I couldn't agree more. The Porsche 356 wasn't just a stepping stone to the iconic 911, it was a groundbreaking car in its own right. It established Porsche as a force to be reckoned with in the world of sports cars, and it set the stage for decades of innovation and excellence. The fact that these cars are still so sought after and cherished today speaks volumes about their enduring appeal.
This deep dive has been an absolute pleasure, and I want to thank our listener for providing such a rich collection of sources. It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope our listener feels equipped to continue their own exploration of the world of the Porsche 356.
It's been my pleasure as well. To our listener, I encourage you to dive deeper into the history, the engineering, and the passion that define this iconic car. There's a world of information out there waiting to be discovered. From historical accounts and technical manuals to online forums and clubs where you can connect with fellow enthusiasts.
Well said. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Until next time, listeners, keep those engines revving and your curiosity for all things automotive alive and well.